Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to AAHC's SAFO meeting, the Senior Administrator and Financial Officers meeting. We're very excited to be engaged with all of you this way. I understand how busy everyone is and how hard everyone is working these days and how rapidly everyone is adapting to change. And so we really appreciate you spending some time here with us. AAHC is 51 years old, and SAFO is about 27 years old. And is our executive leadership group that has met together the longest. And I know some of you have attended this meeting for many, many years, and we're really glad that you're here with us today. And we wish, of course, we could see you in person. Since we can't, we're just delighted that you're here on AAHC Connect, which is our new approach to virtual meetings. I want to congratulate the Planning Committee on the prescient title that they came up with for this meeting. The title is Envisioning the Future Innovation at the Academic Health Center. And who knew at the time the title was created just what kind of innovation we would be involved in and how important it would be to envision the future in new ways. A crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic really highlights the centrality of academic health centers and really shows us why it's so important for academic health centers to work together. It also, for us, highlights the global safety net that our international division represents. We've been doing quite a bit internationally. Since the pandemic began, we have ramped up advocacy efforts significantly. We've been involved in communicating strong support for the relief packages, for DACA, other efforts, and we will continue to do these things to advance the interests of academic health centers. We've also developed some new initiatives. We developed AAHC Best Practices, which is a mechanism to rapidly share information among our members about new approaches and novel solutions, great ideas. You may have seen some of those emails. You may have submitted questions, and we gathered information for you. And we're doing all that very rapidly because we know how fast things are changing at your institutions, and we want to facilitate that in any way we can. We also created something you'll see more about called AAHC Spotlight, which is a new approach to highlighting the critical work that's being done at your institutions around various innovations at this time: testing, treatment, vaccine development, telehealth, teleeducation. And we're looking at some very effective ways to get this information to congressional staffers and other key people. So stay tuned for more on that. And we're doing more, but I'm gonna stop here. We hope that you will join us at the end of today's meeting from about 5 to 5:30 p.m. for what we're calling AAHC Social. It's a time to relax, unwind, take a few minutes to connect with each other, and it will be just an enormous amount of fun. So I really encourage you to try it out. We'll ask each person to share a favorite book, a special piece of art, or your travel substitute. That's what Chris Smith is defining as whatever it is you're doing to refresh and renew yourself since you can't travel. So I've picked up travel substitute from Chris, and we'll so a book, a piece of art, or your travel substitute, and it'll just be enormous fun, so you can't miss it. Couple of quick housekeeping items. If you want to ask a question, there's a Q&A feature at the bottom of the window, so please use that. And in the event of some unforeseen technical difficulty, keep an eye on your email. And that's the way we'll communicate with anybody if there's a problem. So let me turn this over to Margaret Bell, well known to all of you, Assistant Dean for Finance at Tulane University School of Medicine and Chair of the 2020 SAFO Planning Committee. So welcome everyone, and Margaret.
Good morning. I want to thank you everyone again for taking time out of their day to participate in this meeting. You know, I think Stephen said it in his introduction. The title innovation is particularly fitting right now. I don't think any of us could have seen 6 months ago or even 4 months ago where we would be today. This is really unheard of and unprecedented in the history of academic medicine as we know it today. And we're finding ourselves as organizations doing things that we would have said were impossible. If you had asked us a year ago to move our entire workforce outside of our healthcare providers, to move them home, to bootstrap up an expanded telemedicine platform, and to find new ways of making up for not being able to travel, including a virtual conference this morning. I think most of us would have laughed each other out of the room, but we are doing it, and we're finding new ways to tackle the bigger challenges that COVID has presented. Hopefully, as a medicine community and even as a nation, addressing some of the new challenges and weaknesses that this pandemic has exposed. I don't say they're new weaknesses, but they've been exposed by the pandemic. But moving into our first topic of the day, our first session is a panel titled Candid Conversations, Responding to Complex Challenges in a Time of Rapid Change, which I think is particularly fitting for a start to this panel. As a reminder, our panelists are going to give their presentations. If you have questions that come up during the presentations, if you could enter them into the Q&A screen that is on the bottom of your screen, rather than on the chat screen. We will be monitoring chat, but I'm going to go to the Q&A screen as my primary source for questions. We'll come back to the questions at the end of the presentations by all three panelists. I'd like to introduce our panelists. The first one is Larry Fernstall, Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer at Oregon Health and Science University, and a more than once, not quite frequent, but regular past presenter at SAFO. So he should be familiar to everybody this morning. Also, I'd like to introduce Dr. Michael Mash, not doctor, but Michael Mash, Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer at Howard University, and Stephanie Webb, MBA and Vice Chancellor for Administration at the University of Kansas Medical Center. I think Larry is going to begin with the first presentation. So Larry, I will turn it over to you.
Unmute first. Thank you, Margaret. I'm delighted to be here virtually from the West Coast. I'm also delighted to be attending a SAFO meeting in my cargo shorts. Hope you can see that. There we go. Okay. What I'd like to use is the topic. Obviously, we're fixated, like everyone else is, on responding to the environment, COVID-19 and the recession, but I want to focus more on our preparation for what we believe to be a severe economic recession that we're in now, and how we've been managing that and some of the decisions we've been making, just to start it off today. At the very beginning of the pandemic, in the middle of March here in Portland, the president of OHSU and the university cabinet made three key decisions that guided our response. And I believe these were substantive decisions, meaning that we could have decided the alternatives to this, that they sort of fit together. In other words, they come together as a package. And I think it's also the case that there was a great deal of discussion, alternatives were considered, analysis was presented, but this has been our overall guiding principle. And one of the things I think I'm most proud of in terms of our leadership, particularly the president, is that we've articulated and held pretty closely to these principles. The first of which is that we would sort of assume the worst and hope for the better, but assume on the worst side. And we often call that we will tighten first and loosen later. And what we're trying to do there is avoid repeated rounds of cutting, if possible, if the situation worsens, particularly if the economic situations. The second principle is that we would try very hard to avoid layoffs and that we would reduce salaries instead. That we would reduce higher salaries of faculty and administrators more than more middle or lower salaries, but we do that in a consistent way across the university. And finally, OHSU has its hospital within and its practice plan within the University Corporation, as well as research and education, and that we would act as one university, even though it's very clear that different units and different missions of the university are being impacted to differing extents and at different times. Here's our sort of trend of activity. The first 2 weeks of March were largely unaffected here in Oregon by COVID-19. Then in the middle of March, we went to mandatory telecommuting, and shortly thereafter, the governor restricted most travel and elective procedures. And you can see that this is just a metric of our patient activity. We lost 40% of our patient activity, which was about $80 million a month in the month of April. In May, we've sort of started to come back. We're currently operating, roughly 10% down from our pre-COVID level. We're budgeting for the year that just began 8% down. And normally we would have budgeted a 5% growth trend. So that represents about a 13% swing on $2.5 billion of net patient revenue at OHSU. Like much of the rest of the country, we had an increase in cases in Oregon. It declined somewhat, and then we're seeing a significant increase in cases, and somewhat of a pausing, or in some cases reversal of reopening of the state. So there's a tremendous degree of uncertainty both about the pandemic and about the recession. From a financial perspective, in the 8 months of our fiscal year prior to COVID-19 through February, we were making about $11 million a month in operating income at the university, a little bit above our budget. Month of March, which was about a third impacted, that swung to a negative $23 million loss, then a $68 million loss in April, a $40 million loss in May. I've been a CFO of an academic health center or university now for 33 years, and it's certainly the case I've never seen such a large swing. Through 11 months, we were $161 million off our operating budget. We've received about $37 million of CARES Act and other government support. At that, we hope to get a roughly equivalent amount in the current year, although none of that is guaranteed. As a result, not just of the pandemic, but of the recession, and guiding by those principles, we made a series of projections. Again, I do projections for a living, and I've never seen such a wide swing in possible outcomes. We would assume a continued loss in patient activity, although at a lesser amount. We would assume a shift from commercial to government payer mix due to unemployment. And we would assume significant cuts in state funding, including our general appropriation, which is small, our intergovernmental transfer funding for research and education, which is large, and Medicaid payment rates. We have a state economist who projects for the legislature as they balance the budget. They're projecting out of 1.9 million jobs in the state of Oregon that 12% will be lost by December. And so we assume that of our 41%, 41 out of 100 of our patients who have commercial insurance, that 12% of them, or about 5%, would be lost. That is, they would shift from commercial insurance to lower paying Medicaid or Oregon Health Plan insurance. That alone is a $90 million impact. And finally, they projected that tax receipts and other state revenues are forecast to fall $10 billion over 3 biennia, which is a lot of money, about a 17% decrease in state revenues. So we prepared a budget that includes an operating loss of $95 million, significant reduction to annual capital spending, and we were in the middle, about to begin construction on a hospital expansion, a $460 million project, and we have paused that. Normally, we would have expected our activity, patient activity, to grow by 5% a year, research and education to grow, but a little bit less than that. We would have expected a 7% trend in operating revenue and at least $145 million of operating income to reinvest in our people and our programs and places. We're projecting instead a shortfall of about $1.3 billion over 3 years in revenue, making up about $770 million of that through lower expenses, but nonetheless having a shortfall of $575 million in terms of our operating income. In order to keep it to that level, given the assumptions we made a number of things which were very difficult. First is we normally give annual contracts every June to our administrators and our faculty. We gave 3-month contracts instead, although we expect to extend them for the further 9 months in October. We eliminated merit and cost of living increases, which is about $25 million a year. We've said no hiring of administrators from outside of the university. And then the biggest single thing we did is we reduced salaries for all faculty and administrative staff, so our non-union salaried employees, averaging 10% of current pay. And that's $90 million to the bottom line. And the way we did that is that the first $50,000 of any salary was not reduced, but every dollar above $50,000 was reduced by 18%. And then that averaged to 10% over the totality of it. And about 4,500 faculty and administrators were affected. We are in the middle of union contracts, and while we discussed whether or not we could defer increases, we did not get agreement on that from our largest union. So we were reducing hours, but again, trying not to have widespread layoffs. We've also, of course, reduced spending on services and supplies and capital spending and deferring strategic plan investments, although we have tried to prioritize scholarships and faculty recruitment, particularly of diverse and underrepresented folks. Our issue is not managing cash. We started the recession, this period, with about $1.2 billion of cash, not including our endowment, meaning retained earnings. That's a little bit low for a AA- credit relative to our peers and competitors, particularly when you consider our pension liability, which is high. But balancing that has always been a strong track record of growth and a bottom line. And of course, that's beginning to reverse. We are deferring hundreds of millions of dollars in capital spending, which mitigates the cash impact, but we'll need to resume those investments at some point. The actual limit on our deficit, why we aren't spending down more cash and instead of reducing salary so much, is our debt service coverage covenant. The necessity that our income available for debt service covers our debt service each year by a certain margin. Normally, we clear this restriction by hundreds of millions of dollars, and it will be really close in the current year. I will note that while we're projecting a $95 million deficit in the current year, I would not be surprised if there was a plus or minus $100 million swing on those numbers. So we're trying to be cautious, trying to tighten first, loosen later, and navigate through all of this in a way that preserves the strength of the university when we come out the other side of both the pandemic and the recession in a position of strength and ability to resume growth. We are performing a bit better than we had feared a month or two ago. As a result of that, we are planning to raise that exemption on the faculty and administrative salary reductions in the fall, so that particularly junior faculty and first-line supervisors are impacted less. And then we have also said that anything we achieve above the $95 million deficit for next year, we'll share half of it with a gain sharing for those who incurred salary reductions. Again, sort of starting from the bottom and moving up in terms of the salary ranges. So let me stop there. I hope that gives you a sense of how we've conceived of this during this time period, and look forward to your questions when we get to that part of the talk. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Larry. That was informative, if more than a little bit scary. We're going to move on now to Dr. Mash, to Mr. Mash from Howard University.
Great. Hi, good morning, everyone. Let me just bring my presentation up for you, which I'm going to do right now. And there we go. Good. So I seem to be representing the East Coast on this panel. Of course, there's a lot of different institutions on the East Coast, and Howard is unique among them. We're unique in the District of Columbia metropolitan region, and unique in other ways. And the COVID crisis for us has been a significant interruption in the middle of a period of enormous change that we were already going through. And so I really want to do this presentation in three parts: an introduction to the Howard University Health Sciences undertaking and the hospital in particular, and a little look at our recent metrics on operations and funding, talk about the immediate impact of COVID on us and our long-term plans, and how we think the current crisis may modify or change the pace or direction of those long-term plans. So for those who don't know, Howard University Hospital is a corporate component of Howard University, and our practice plan is a separate incorporated component of the university. It's not part of the hospital. It's operated through the College of Medicine. Howard University is, on the academic side, a highly selective research university that has a unique mission in that its primary focus is to serve the African American community and the African diaspora. The overwhelming majority of faculty, and even more so of students, are Americans of African descent. Howard has a long and storied history of producing leaders, both in intellectual, political, and social service, and in particular in healthcare in the African American community. I put up a few stats just to give you an idea of what that means. Over its history, we have graduated over 10,000 physicians, and more than half of our graduates serve in minority communities you know, after graduation. The hospital has been around for a while. It was founded in 1862, and it actually predates the founding of Howard University. It was originally the Freedmen's Hospital, and it was established to provide medical care to newly emancipated people after the Civil War who were seeking refuge in the DC area. After Howard was founded, then the Congress merged Freeman's with Howard University. First medical students were graduated from the medical school in 1871. In 1961, the hospital was actually formally transferred under the ownership of the university, and our current facility. So the Freedmen's Hospital is in the picture that you see in the upper left. The current University Hospital building, which is now about 45 years old, was built with substantial federal support. One of our very strong goals is to stand up a new Howard University Hospital by 2025, and we were actively engaged in the preparatory work to move to the achievement of that goal when all the events of this spring hit. We have strong integration between the university and the health sciences programs in particular, and the hospital. And you can see some of the stats here in terms of the size of the operation. There are about 475 medical students at any given time. There is a residency program with 224 slots. The majority, but they're not all in their rotations at Howard University Hospital, but most of them are at any given time. And we have about 175 clinical faculty who are serving in the faculty practice plan in about 23 areas of specialty. And then we have integrated programs with hospital operations and the other health sciences schools as well. Now, Howard University and Howard University Hospital have a significant impact on the Washington area, but nationally as well. We provide more African-American and minority doctors, dentists, and other healthcare professionals than any other single institution in the United States. And we've done all this in an environment in the past couple of decades of significant challenge given what's going on in the surrounding healthcare community. For those of you who know the DC metropolitan area, we have 3 academic medical centers located within the boundaries of the district at George Washington University and Georgetown, as well as Howard. And a significant presence from the University of Maryland health system and the Johns Hopkins system in the suburbs to our north. Less of an academic medical center presence to the south, but a very strong integrated healthcare network in Inova, which has a very large market share in the southern suburbs of the district. So what happened at George Washington and Georgetown was that each of them about 20 years ago decided that it was in the best interest of the university to make a partnership with a private for-profit entity to take over the ownership and operations of their hospital. And obviously there were discussions at Howard University about following suit, but because the hospital was so integrated into this unique academic mission, there was reluctance on the part of the leadership and the trustees to do that. So that was not done and has not been done to this day. However, the current president and the current board are committed to taking Howard University on a track that will lead to our no longer owning and operating our own hospital, but having a partner institution that is part of a larger healthcare system and can realize the economies of scale and efficiencies and ability to gain and grow market share that as one freestanding institution, Howard University Hospital does not have. And in particular, since Howard University Hospital has as its primary mission in the DC region to serve traditionally underserved populations to reduce healthcare disparities. And I'll show you payer mix in a minute, but the fact that it's a freestanding institution and has no synergies, has no economies of scale, and it doesn't have a larger footprint, has put us at a significant disadvantage. And the university and the hospital have lacked the capital necessary for investments in personnel, in facilities, in operations. And the hospital was, by many significant measures, deteriorating up to 5 years ago, when on a base of about $250 million, the university lost $68 million in a single year. That was the year that Dr. Wayne Frederick became the president of Howard University. And although as president, Dr. Frederick has a wide range of responsibilities, he has a very strong interest and a very strong involvement in the health sciences enterprise at Howard. He is a triple alum of the university, was an undergraduate at Howard, received an MBA from Howard, but is also a graduate of the Howard University Medical School and continues to be a practicing surgical oncologist. So he knows the hospital, he knows the clinical faculty very well, and maybe that gave him the unique ability to bring the board to an understanding that in the healthcare world that we live in now, if we want our enterprise to thrive, we really need the synergies that would come from having a partner. But our first goal was to rehabilitate the institution on our own, which we did in the period from 2015 to 2019. We immediately stopped operating losses. We've had modest operating surpluses since then, have stabilized the size of the faculty and are growing it, have stabilized patient volumes. And I'm showing you here our average daily census for this year. And you'll note that pre-COVID, we were tracking in the area of occupied beds at around 150 to 160. You see that in April and May that dropped. It dropped even more in terms of traditional admissions, because those are supplanted by the COVID admissions during that period. But to put that in context, 4 years before, the average daily census had dropped as low as 80, 90. So we have been building that up over this time. Observation cases used to be very high level, cleaned up admissions. Our rev cycle is much improved. And so notwithstanding this, which is the payer mix, which as you see is very heavily dependent on Medicare and Medicaid, which is not surprising given the current population that we serve, 85% one form of Medicaid, either fee-for-service or managed care, or Medicare. Very small commercial and private pay. We have been seeking partnership and announced late in calendar 2019 that we had agreed to a management agreement with Adventist Healthcare, which is a small chain which owns several hospitals in the Maryland suburbs, and a variety of other ancillary clinical practices and other medical outpatient facilities. Very good track record, very strong financially. They decided they would like to partner with us in stages. First, taking over management of Howard University Hospital while it still remained under the university's corporate umbrella. And then we want to move towards their taking over the ownership of the existing hospital. And then we are committed actively to working together to build a new Howard University Hospital by 2025. We have significant support from the district government, which is in the process of passing a major economic incentive program for us. Here's how we stand in terms of our footprint in Washington. Before the surge, we were at 7% of total beds within the city, and you see the primary players are George Washington's hospital, which is operated by Universal, and MedStar, which operates both the Washington Medical Center and the hospital at Georgetown. So Adventist Healthcare had the exquisite timing to take over the management of Howard University Hospital in February of 2020. So they have been along for the ride with us in the past months, and we're relieved that that is the case. That the fact that we had a deeper supply chain certainly helped us with acquiring PPE and other supplies that we needed. We've been able to collaborate with them in a very effective way. Their hospitals traditionally do not serve a low income and minority population. Our hospital does, and so we have taken on a disproportionate share of the COVID patients in the District of Columbia. Now, the District of Columbia, anticipating the surge, went to all of the hospitals in Washington and indicated that they would fund a capacity surge expansion so that we could deal with the anticipated surge in COVID cases. All of the hospitals responded, but on a percentage basis, we had 193 active beds. As you saw, we were doing a census around 150, 160. We committed in 6 weeks to stand up 176 additional beds. So that was a 90% plus increase in our capacity. We did that by May 15th. And this is an illustration of some of the renovation work we did. The hospital used to be a lot bigger, so we had many spaces that had either were unoccupied or underutilized or actually being utilized for other purposes. So for instance, the entire administration of our College of Nursing was located in one wing. We're now moving them into another building. Our experience, we're just updating these numbers for our board meeting this Saturday, but you can see that even as of 2 months ago, we had already had 194 COVID cases. Unfortunately, about 40% of those admissions did not survive. They were pretty far advanced when we took them in. The admissions have been were subsiding and now are starting to ratchet up again. Financially, we have not, and this is kind of what the growth has been in total patients and in COVID patients during this period. We have not been as adversely impacted as other institutions. First of all, Medicare and Medicaid are reliable pay. The reimbursements for the COVID patients, as you know, have a markup. We moved our faculty practice plan aggressively to telemedicine just about from the outcome, and maintained much higher patient encounter volumes for the practice plan and outpatient activity where telemedicine was feasible in the hospital. And the result is that that and CARES funding, and the CARES funding formulas have been very favorable to an institution like Howard. The uncompensated, we just received 2 weeks ago funding under the uncompensated care distribution. We just received funding on Friday under the high impact distribution. And those will basically replace a significant share of the lost revenue that we encountered during this period. We've managed the COVID crisis for the university and the hospital separate from one another, in part because our whole direction is to go towards the hospital and the university both being able to be self-sustaining entities on their own. But we hope that we will be able to come out of this period and then proceed with our longer term goal, which is with our new partner in Adventist Healthcare, to undertake what is about a $1.3 billion overall investment program that will involve a new hospital, but also parking, a medical office building, and new facilities for our healthcare colleges. And we have identified much of the funding and are working to secure the rest of it. We're seeking to use public-private partnerships where we can for things like the medical office building and the support parking. And this is the complex that we hope to build. So we've been enormously occupied with trying to respond to the current emergency. Because of our community focus, we immediately went into the lowest income communities and set up, with the blessing of the DC government, pop-up testing sites in the 7th and 8th wards, that what's called the Anacostia area. We are now in negotiations for a possible major grant from a corporation that will permit us to stand up a regional testing center that would serve not only our campus, but other HBCUs in the Mid-Atlantic area. And we are also in our medical school and in our other scientific programs, we have several key researchers who are actively involved in vaccine research work, in particular with a focus on ensuring that we have clinical trials that will reach into the minority communities that have been most significantly impacted by the current crisis. So let me stop there. So that's what we've been up to. And I'm delighted to be on a panel with my colleagues. All of us are in different situations, I know, but all of us have had a tremendously difficult period that we've had to work through. And I look forward to learning from others about your experiences.
Let's see. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for that presentation. I actually have a couple questions myself I wanted to ask you, but I'm going to move ahead to Stephanie's presentation and hope we have time to come back at the end. Stephanie, I'm going to turn the screen over to you and let you begin.
Okay, I'm going to try my best to share my screen, and there we go. I think that's working. Actually, it's on the wrong. Somebody from AAHC moved me back to the opening slide.
If you use the arrow keys on your keyboard, the left arrow should move you back to prior slides.
Okay, one moment. It's seeming not to work. There we go. Yeah, so I thought that my approach to the conversation today would be a little more general. And first of all, I love the topic because I love complex challenges, and I actually love change as well. And for sure, COVID is top of mind for everyone right now. And I wanted my remarks today to be more general, really, because actually complex challenges and rapid change seem to always be with us. And I always think that the first and most important response really is about the mindset, and particularly the mindset of leaders, because it's incumbent upon us to help to, I don't know, to set the tone for the organization and for everyone else. And I love a quote from Captain Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean. And that quote is, the problem is not the problem is your attitude about the problem. And there's a mantra that I always keep in mind, and a sign in my office reminds me to do this. And that is keep calm and carry on, that no matter what is going on, the first thing to do is just to gather yourself together and just think calmly about the situation. And the way that I always manage to do that myself is to remind myself that no matter what the challenge, no matter what the situation is, that there's a way. And even if I don't know at the moment, even if my colleagues don't know at the moment how we're going to approach this, just the knowledge that together we can figure out a way forward, it's a very reassuring and calming thing. I think my first approach in that is always thinking to myself, given this set of circumstances that we're faced with, what's the next best thing that I can do? In the absence of a full-blown solution, especially to something as massive of a challenge as COVID has been, what do we do given what we're faced with at the moment? And really to not get overwhelmed and confounded by the complexity of the change that's been and the circumstances that have been forced upon us. And again, just to stay calm and to figure out how to take action in some way. And so first steps for me in that and with my colleagues is always really to ground ourselves in the mission, to remind ourselves why we exist as an organization, who we're there to serve, what our primary missions are. And then really to just calmly assess the environment and really just ask ourselves, okay, what is the situation? And then the next step, just logically, is to set goals to fulfill the mission and achieve the vision in the context of these new factors. And a key piece of that always is a focus on what is possible. And really to believe that the disruption, no matter how upsetting it may be for people, no matter how challenging it may be, that disruption actually creates a golden opportunity for innovation, for creating change that we may have wanted in the past. And I know in previous SAFO meetings that I've attended and different talks that I've heard, one of the challenges in academic health centers has been a tendency for things to kind of fossilize over time and to get really mired in status quo. And so, and the familiar is always a very comfortable place to be, but faced with enormous change, it creates a mandate for something new, and resistance to innovation and new ways of thinking and doing really are reduced during that time. So we may as well take advantage of that. And so for leaders, I think courage is the single most important thing at that time. And to understand that you don't have to have all the answers, that you're not going to have all of the answers. And what really is needed at times of challenge and disruption is questions, really good questions. And in an academic environment, questions are good things. And so what are the right questions? And the answers will present themselves, I think, as you move forward. There's a quote from Shakespeare about whether it's better to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. And so I really like that idea. It's very easy and sometimes tempting to kind of sit in the corner and wring our hands about what all the things are that are challenging us, and the difficulties and the loss of funding and all the numerous things that really have come to the forefront now in this time of COVID. But I think a really important concept for me is the power of imperfect starts. And there's an article that a blogger named James Clear wrote several years ago. And the main concept there is that you don't really have to have a perfect plan to get started. And in fact, sometimes trying to optimize and waiting to get started until you have the perfect and elegant plan is really a barrier to making progress. So in my organization, I try to encourage people to think about what can we do? What's the next best step that we can take right now? And then we'll just improve on that plan as we go along. But let's not wait to get all our ducks in a row or get the perfect strategy or the perfect anything. Let's just think about this and decide what's the most important thing that we can do next given the current set of circumstances. There's another article that I really like that is out of the Wall Street Journal years ago, and it's called The Genius of the Tinkerer. And the main concept there is that the best ideas, sometimes the best innovations, aren't really big breakthrough concepts that somebody sitting in isolation thinking about how to solve a major problem. It's not a major breakthrough, but more people thinking together and cobbling together ideas and concepts and tools that have been in place for a long time, that you can recombine those in new and interesting ways to solve new and interesting problems that you have. And then the final thing really is about embracing opportunities. And it goes back to what I said kind of at the beginning, not really being fearful or distressed when challenging situations arise, even something as challenging as the COVID crisis that we're following. that we're dealing with right now. But really to say, in this time of intense challenge, change has already come. Why don't we embrace the opportunity that disruption has created, the opportunity and in fact the mandate to innovate now, and to have courage in thinking about new ways to approach new problems. And I believe really that we can thrive in times like this. You know, a lot of the talk now is about how do we survive or how do we get back to what things were before. And my thought really is more of a future focus, is we probably aren't going back to what we knew before, probably never are going back to exactly what we knew before. But the language that we can use around that with ourselves and with our colleagues is all about what could be possible now, given the current set of circumstances, what could be possible now that people would have been resistant to before. And like Margaret said at the beginning, work from home used to be a thing that we always thought was an impossibility. And now just overnight, it became a necessity, and we did it and we made it work. And so then my final thought really is just from Thoreau in Walden, that if one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life he's imagined, he will meet with success in uncommon hours. Thank you all.
Thank you, Stephanie. I appreciate that. It is 9:53. We have about 5 minutes before we move into the roundtable breakout session. So I wanted to ask each of the presenters, I had specific questions for each of you, but I think we are running a little short on time. So if I could ask each of you just one question, I think we've all been very focused on the challenges and problems that the pandemic and recent political events have, and the upcoming recession have posed for all of us. But I'm wondering if each of you have taken some time to think about what opportunities might come out of these events for your institution. And if so, could you take a couple minutes to talk about that? And I'm going to start with Larry, go to Michael, and then finish up with Stephanie.
Sure, that's a great question. Here's how I think about it. OHSU arguably is maybe the 30th ranked research institution in biomedicine and healthcare in the United States. And I think we'd really like to be higher in that. We'd really like to be top 20 or top 15, and not just an NIH ranking, but just in terms of how people perceive us. And that was always a matter of incremental growth, sort of clawing our way up from 30 to 29 to 28. I think we have an opportunity, if we play this well, to reposition ourselves in a leap upward in terms of our position. So we're thinking things like, we have 5,000 monkeys in our primate center. We have a very good vaccine and gene therapy institute. We have a very good cancer institute. Telemedicine has shown us how we can have a much more national reach. My own view is that this is not a once in a century type of pandemic, but that because of all sorts of global issues, infectious diseases and the risks of other pandemics will be much, much more frequent going forward. So what's our ability to be a leader in those types of, and reposition ourselves from a regional to a national footprint? And part of what we're trying to do is preserve all the forms of capital we have, intellectual and physical and then and financial, and then redeploy it in a way that is focused on what are really new and emerging challenges, social determinants of health, healthcare disparities, all of those things you could think about. So I think we're doing a lot of thinking about that, and to me that makes it really exciting. And I really resonated to all the things Stephanie described in terms of what to keep in mind at times like this. as well as Michael's focus on just the pure mission of Howard University was inspiring.
You're muted, Margaret.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Larry. Let's move on to Michael.
Well, I think you won't be surprised if I say to you that we think at Howard we are in an unexpected and strange position in some ways. When all of this hit in March, we did projections to year end for the university and the hospital, and they were pretty dire. And we were having emergency meetings of the Board of Trustees and looking at the ways that we thought we'd be adversely impacted, that faculty couldn't go to their labs, research activity and research billings would go down, donors would freeze contributions, we would see a decrease in enrollment, and net tuition. We would lose regular patient encounters, both inpatient and outpatient. And some of all of those things happened, but some other things happened as well. We are finding that there are both corporations and private individuals who are taking very seriously the real life example of healthcare disparities that we're seeing in the pandemic in the United States. And they are looking for investments that they could make that could make for positive change. And there are many worthy institutions, and I hope they'll all be funded, but we are gratified to see that government, corporate, and private donors are all of a sudden energized in terms of speaking to us about ways that we might partner. And so we, I think, have a unique opportunity out of this to try to make some good out of all the horrendous things that have happened to us. And both in terms of our research enterprise, our practice, and the production of a growing number of graduates of our medical and health sciences programs who will increase diversity in the healthcare workforce.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. Let's finish up with Stephanie, and then we'll move on to the roundtable.
I think this has just created an opportunity to break down a lot of silos that existed in our organization, that in the emergency response and then the recovery that we're trying to move into now, we've developed multidisciplinary teams that are working together. It's the schools and the support areas. People, really leaders at all levels, have had to emerge to deal with this. So it's not really just the title leaders anymore, the official leaders of the organization that are helping to forge the path forward. So that's been a really neat thing. And another very practical matter is that we're starting to realize a lot of the old buildings that we needed to tear down and never could because they're occupied, we probably can take down some buildings. And we also are probably not going to need to build the $40 million parking garage that we were slated to have to build if people are moving off campus.
I wish I could convince my administration that they should be thinking about repurposing offices. I keep telling them it's a lot cheaper to turn an office into a lab than it is to build a new building.
Yes.
All right, thank you. All right, we are going to break into the smaller groups for the breakout session. If you would leave this session and then either in the chat box, let me go and check and make sure. Yes, the link is in the chat box. Is the new session where we'll go into breakout groups for the roundtables. So I'm going to leave you with that, and we'll see you in just a couple minutes at the new link.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.